Go. Good. Okay. So, New Jersey, Crossroads of the Revolution, also called the cockpit of the Revolution. And it's because we were right in the middle of it, right in between New York, where the British spent most of their time, and right in Philadelphia, where the Patriots spent most of their time, with the exception of the winter of 77, 78, when the British got it. And there are a number of other reasons why it is called the Crossroads of the Revolution, and we will see that as I go along. Let me get this to move. There we go. Now, the population, the best numbers we have were for 1772, and that was 127,000 people in New Jersey compared to the 9.5 million we have today. But what's important to realize is that they weren't all over the state like they are now. As you can see on the slide, the area in red is where most of the population was. All down the southeast side and the northwest, that was very, very sparsely populated. So the population was really concentrated in a small area. Now, in 2002, the American Battlefield Protection Program identified 296 Revolutionary War battles, skirmishes, or actions in New Jersey. 296. Well, in 1976, for the bicentennial, David C. Munn recorded, he published his book, Battles and Skirmishes of the American Revolution in New Jersey, and he recorded 607. And he counted every military incident between 1774 and 83 based on archives and local history. So he went much deeper. And he created this map, which I had to split in half for you to see. But everywhere you see writing, that was an incident. So look at how much of it there is, including a lot of it out there on the coast. Well, in his introduction to the book, he says, "We have tried to include on the map every overt or hostile action by either side that could be documented. Generally speaking, any event, including a shot fired in anger, is listed. There are many examples of hostile actions that did not involve shots, but they are significant to the course of the war and are included. In many instances, events may be nothing more than opposing sides shouting obscenities to each other from a safe distance."
Patricia, I can't.
So let's look at who was affected. Now, of course, the men who were in the Continental Army, the Loyalist Army, which was the British Army or a Loyalist militia, and the men who were part of the county militias were actually more involved than the men who were in the Continental Army. Families working farms and businesses when the men were gone. People producing materials, food, and fodder for the armies, or had them taken by armies. Patriots, loyalists, neutrals, and peoples whose homes and land were pillaged or taken. So we just said patriots, loyalists, neutrals. Patriots, what the British called rebels. So when we went to school, we were all patriots, right? Yeah, all patriots. But in reality, we wouldn't have been. A third of us would have been loyalists who still felt a loyalty to King George, thought that those taxes were reasonable, and that we should stay as part of the British society. About a third of us would have been neutral. Many would have been Quakers. The closer you get to Pennsylvania, the more Quakers. But a lot of them were just people who kept their head down and wanted it to be over. They didn't feel strongly one way or the other. So about a third, and a third, but it varied some depending on where you were. Morris County had a little more tendency to be Patriot. Some other counties, little more towards the Loyalists. So there was a lot of variety in there. Let's talk about the militia, because almost every man in New Jersey between the ages of 16 and 50 were in the militia. It was a state law. They had to be there. So even before the Revolutionary War, there was a militia, and it was to protect communities from, yes, they're not seeing your slides. What? Okay, hang on. Let's see if we can figure this out.
We can't see your slides. You're not sharing the slide screen.
That's weird.
We're just seeing your desktop.
Population slide, somebody just, there you go.
Oh, we got
You
it.
got
There
it.
you go, right there.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, is it
Advance
still good?
Advance it. No.
Oh, yeah, it's up here. Now you got both slides, if you have.
Okay. Oh, yes, and the thumbs are going up.
Okay, good.
I see it.
Okay. Jeez.
Takes a village, right?
Takes a village. Yeah, so thank you, everybody, for your patience. I appreciate it. Okay, so where were we? Okay, let's see. Okay, get that. How do I get that out of there? There we go. Okay. All right. So we had determined that we were about 50, 30, 30, 30. Okay, let's look at the militia. Okay, so if you were between 16, and by the way, thank you, 15 and 16 and 50, you had to serve in the militia. So what happens if you're a loyalist? Well, you have to decide if you're going to be in the militia and just swallow it, or are you going to be a loyalist and leave the area for your own safety and go to New York City, where there is a loyalist militia being put together. If you're a neutral, you're going to have to be in that militia, even if you don't support the war, unless, and there are some exceptions here, you are physically, mentally, or religiously exempt. So the Quakers got to get out of it. If you provide an essential service, such as being a miller or an ironmonger, or you had the money to pay a substitute. Yes, and you could. It was legal. It was legal. So you served every other month, which meant you were working a part-time job, half-time job, and if you were a farmer, you were working a full-time job as well. So it was really stressful being a member of the militia. Now, in addition to that, you had to provide all of your own equipment, your own musket, your own lead for ball, your own powder, your own accoutrements, such as your powder horn and your anything else you needed to carry with you. Now, what happens if you have a father and two sons who are over 16? All three of you have to be supplied. This is expensive. If you're a farmer, you're just above being a subsistence farmer. And the further it got into the war, it was harder to replace things, such as muskets. So it was tough. It was not easy being in the militia. In addition to that, you might be sent far away from where your home is. You might be sent, if you lived in Morris County, you might be sent over to Essex, or you might be sent down to Trenton. Now, there were a few really important things that the militia was good at, and that was harassing enemy foragers. Now, the enemy lived over there in New York, and they had to keep coming to New Jersey to get food. So the militia, it was their job to harass them and make it so hard for them to do it, they would stop coming here. The other thing they were really important with was gathering intelligence. They knew the area, they knew what was going on, they knew their neighbors. So that was very important. It was also important that they guarded critical roads and bridges. And that was certainly true here in Chatham when we were still Day's Bridge. And that was the route over the Passaic River. And the Chatham militia guarded that for the entire time. So, manpower. Manpower was constantly, there was a constant shortage. Now, what were the jobs that men did at this time? Farming was the biggest one. Being a miller, and this could be for sawmill, grist mill, which ground grains, fulling mill, which prepared wool, tanneries, iron mining. In Northwest Jersey, they were the big mines all over that area. And in the Pinelands, it was bog iron. You just went and picked it all up. The iron furnaces and forges throughout the state. Iron was essential to the war. Cannonballs, shot, cannons themselves, the cooking kettles that the soldiers carried with them, and all the daily things that were needed for civilian life. So you had to have this stuff. And in order to have iron, you had to have charcoal. So colliers or charcoal burners were essential. So here are all these jobs that are essential, but these men are missing half the time. So imagine what it's like to try to keep this war economy going. Let's look at the Continental Army now. The first year of the war, 1775 to 76, the Continental Army included the whole spectrum of men, whether you were a wealthy man or somebody that was just a medium businessman, or you weren't a fairly poor farmer. It was a whole spectrum in there. But after a year, they realized that they couldn't create an army every single year. You had to have this overflow from one year to the next. So after that, when you signed up for to be in the Continental Army, it was for 3 years or the length of the war, whichever was shorter. So now you get a different group of people as your primary private soldiers, young, unattached men with no land and probably came off the farm or would have gone into apprenticeships. Because if you're a businessman, are you going to give up your business for 3 years? If you're a wealthy man, just hire someone else to take your place instead. So it changed the complexion of the army to a very great degree as a result of that. Now, as I mentioned before, not everybody wanted to be in the Continental Army. They were not patriots. There were a lot of loyalists, and they joined the New Jersey Volunteers. It started out as a loyalist militia, but they actually, a lot of them got drawn into the British Army, and they actually served in the British Army. And there was a point in time where there were actually, let me see who said that. Thomas Fleming in New Jersey in the American Revolution noted that at one point there were more Jersey men serving in the British Army than in the New Jersey Brigade of the Continental Army. This is a map that shows Washington's retreat across New Jersey. Now, in 1775 and 76, the Americans laid siege to Boston, and eventually the British left Boston and evacuated. And so Washington marches his forces from Massachusetts down to New York. Well, unfortunately, the British land on Long Island with all of these forces, and the Americans lose the Battle of Long Island, the Battle of Harlem Heights, the Battle of White Plains. Then they are forced to abandon Fort Washington, then Fort Lee, and now they are retreating across New Jersey. They have just been trounced. So they're headed off to Pennsylvania. What's left of the army is off to Pennsylvania, and that's where they rest for a time. So this looks pretty bad for the Americans, but Washington decides he's going to take this major risk because if he does nothing, the revolution is probably over. So now come the 10 crucial days, the end of December and the beginning of January 1776-77. So on Christmas night, they crossed the Delaware from Pennsylvania to New Jersey, McConkey's Ferry. And then on December 26th, they attacked the Hessians in the Battle of Trenton and trounce the Hessians. They go back across the Delaware. Did you know that? They went back and forth and back and forth. So a couple of days later, they crossed the Delaware again. And then a couple of days after that, they engaged the British in the Second Battle of Trenton, also known as the Battle of Assunpink Creek. And this is sometimes called, well, maybe it's a victory, maybe it's not, because they fight until dark. And then in the dark of the night, Washington leaves the area with his campfires burning and disappears up towards Princeton. So the British claim he left the field of battle, therefore they did not win, but the Americans felt indeed they had won. So Battle of Princeton, January 3rd, this is clearly an American victory, and then they head north. So they're going to go to Morristown, and this is a chart of the 8 years of winter encampments during the Revolutionary War. And these are important because armies didn't fight in the winter. It just didn't make good sense. It was too hard. So they pretty much agreed, well, we'll just wait it out and we'll start again in the spring, which is why Washington's 10 crucial days worked so well. The British were sure that they had gone into a winter encampment in Pennsylvania. But this is one of the reasons that we call New Jersey the Crossroads of the Revolution. Look at all those things in red. That's when they were wintering over in New Jersey. Now, sometimes it was the whole army, sometimes it was only part of the army, but they spent 5 out of 8 years here in New Jersey. Now, let's look at the first place. This is Morristown. There were 2 encampments here. The first in the winter of 77, January to May. And Washington is going to be in Arnold's Tavern, marked in blue there. And when he first gets here, there aren't a whole lot of troops. So they're put up in houses and barns and things like that. But once more troops start getting recruited and coming in, they had to be in a more concentrated place. And that's where the Lewanika encampment comes in, and that's encircled with red. And that was here in Chatham Township. Now, the year of 1779 to 80, that is when we had Jockey Hollow. So in that time, then the yellow dot, did I say the yellow dot before? No. I didn't, okay. The yellow dot, which marks Ford's Mansion, and if you haven't been there, go there. And then the black circle marks Jockey Hollow. So why was Morristown so good? Went the wrong way. There we go. No. There. Why was Morristown so good? Geography. So all of the blue there and the burgundy, those are the Watchung Mountains. And then the chartreuse green, those are swamps. And the Great Swamp is where Long Hill happened to get circled. That's the Great Swamp. Morristown circled in red, and in gold are the New Jersey Highlands. This is one heck of a natural fortress. The only way you can get there is that little gap that's northwest of Springfield. And back then it was really narrow, the Hobart Gap. Now it's really big and wide because 24 goes through there. But back then it was very narrow. It was easy for a militia to protect. If you did get through the Hobart Gap, who did you run into? Chatham Militia. Yeah, they weren't going to let you over that bridge. And it worked. It was very effective. But there was another reason why Washington wanted to be in Morristown, and this is the gunpowder mill, whose foundations still stand behind Acorn Hall in Morristown. So if you visit Acorn Hall, you can walk down the back on Patriot's Path, and it crosses which river is that? Rahway? I can't remember which river it is, but it's right there on the river. You can actually still see bricks of which the building was made. And what's interesting about this gunpowder production, it wasn't just creating virgin gunpowder, it was remanufacturing damaged gunpowder. So if your gunpowder got wet, you didn't throw it away. You gave it back and it got remade. And this was important because these things were always in short supply. So the great specter of the first Morristown encampment was, of course, smallpox. And I just love this picture. Isn't that scary? With a dead body down there on the left. So Washington had already experienced a smallpox epidemic up in Boston, and he did not want this to happen again in Morristown. So he insisted that the soldiers he had with him get inoculated, and any soldiers that were recruited had to be inoculated before they came to Morristown. Now, inoculation is not vaccination. Vaccination keeps you from getting something. Inoculation gives you a milder case of it and makes you then immune to it. Well, a milder case meant most of the time you weren't going to die. But it also meant you were going to have smallpox for about 3 weeks. So Morristown had a lot of smallpox hospitals in it, churches, private houses, things like that. It worked. It did work. But at one point in March, George Washington had about 3,000 troops, of which 1,000 were still incapacitated. If the British had known it now, at that point, they probably could have made it through the Hobart Gap and into Morristown and destroyed the army. Luckily, they did not know. Now, the second time they were in Morristown, the previous year they had been in Valley Forge, and they thought that was pretty nasty. It was nothing. It was nothing compared to Jockey Hollow. So in Jockey Hollow, they had 28 snowstorms that left 6 to 8 feet of snow. And the locals were not welcoming like they were the first time, because the first time they came, they had just won 3 battles. This time, the locals had had a drought the summer before, so they were kind of short on food themselves. And the money that they were being paid for what they was being taken was Continental dollars. It was worth hardly anything. So this is a picture from the Friends of Jockey Hollow. It's very inaccurate. It should look like this. Well, there's a better picture at the National Park Service Visitor Center at Jockey Hollow that is a pretty good representation of what they were going through. They had shortages of food, clothing, blankets, shoes, just like they did in Valley Forge. But this time it's even colder, it's snowing. Even when they can get food, They can't get it to the troops because of the snow. Well, if you want to read about what it was like to be a soldier in the Continental Army, you want to read the diary of Joseph Plum Martin. It's an easy read. He's a good writer, and it's really his life for, I can't remember whether it was 6 or 7 years during the Revolution. You can find it online for free. If you just type it in, it'll pop up on archive.org or Hathy Trust. You can find it in your library. It's a wonderful read. At one point, and he apologizes constantly about complaining about being hungry, but he was all the time. And in this case, excuse me. From his diary, while he's in Morristown, he says, oh, not yet. At one time it snowed the greater part of 4 days successively, and there fell nearly as many feet of deep snow. And here was the worst of the starvation. We were absolutely, literally starved. I do solemnly declare that I did not put a single morsel of victuals in my mouth for 4 days and as many nights, except a little birch bark, which I gnawed off a stick of wood, if that can be called victuals. I saw several men roast their old shoes and eat them. Tickle. Okay. Now, the New Jersey Brigade was not right in Jockey Hollow. They were actually down in an area off of what is now Hardscrabble Road, very close to where Audubon is. And I'm not sure it was better or worse for them there, but you can still go there and see some of the rubble from the chimneys of their cabins. Okay, let's look at the winter encampments again. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Lemonade didn't seem to.
Thank you. That's better. Thank you. Okay, so at the end of the first Morristown encampment in May, Washington gathered his troops up and they went on to Middlebrook, where some of the troops had already been. So why Middlebrook? Well, Middlebrook is right, the encampment itself was right in the valley between the first and second Watchung. So they were nice and safe down in there. But then you walk up on the first Watchung and look at the view you've got. You are looking at the entire South and the whole coast of central New Jersey. So they were able to see everything that the British were doing at that point. So it was a great place to be. Now, they came back again 2 years later in from December 78 to 79. And they used the same area as an encampment again. But then further north, over by Pluckaman, they had a cantonment. And this is an area that was built of cabins for training the artillery, to really train the artillery. They got really, really good because of this. And this was essentially the first West Point. This was the first place where they were training officers to be officers of the artillery. And the Jacob Vanderveer House in Bedminster is where General Henry Knox and his wife stayed during that period of time. It still exists. It's a wonderful place. Make sure you go visit it. And you can't see the Pluckaman Cantonment, but there have been some archaeological work done there, where they've really been able to figure out how it was laid out, and which groups were in which area and stuff. Fascinating. Okay, here we go back again. And this time we're going to see that in 1781 that the Pennsylvania troops, no, I mean 80, yes, 1780 to 81, the Pennsylvania line was back in Jockey Hollow, and the New Jersey Brigade was up in Pompton. Well, the Pennsylvania line was really tired of the things that Joseph Plum Martin had been complaining about all this time in his diary. And that was, they weren't getting paid, they weren't getting fed decently, they didn't have decent clothes or decent shoes, and the Pennsylvania guys were just plain tired of it. So they mutinied. In the process, 2 of their officers were killed, and they marched down towards Trenton. Their goal was to get to Philadelphia and directly complain to the Continental Congress about what they were being expected to survive. Well, the Continental Congress heard this, and they sent a negotiator to meet these people in Trenton. And they came to an agreement that the men who had not been released from their enlistments, who should have been released from their enlistments, were allowed to go. Some others were allowed to go. They were told, yes, we'll get you more food. Some of them got some money and stuff like that. So some of them were able to resign. So it was settled, and they went back. Well, about 20 days later, the New Jersey troops that were up in Pompton said, well, same thing's happening to us, so we're going to mutiny too. So they decide to mutiny, and they start heading down to Trenton, and they get to Chatham. And they stop there in front of Day's Tavern, and they're trying to talk the militia into joining them. This is, come and mutiny with us. This is important stuff. Well, it just so happened that the American General Howe arrived in Chatham the next day, and he had been told to put a stop to this mutiny for fear that all the troops that were going to do this. Now, I don't know why they didn't think of that with the Pennsylvania troops, because what they did with them was just asking for everybody else to mutiny too. So Howe arrests the mutineers. They are tried, and they are condemned to hang. Just before the hanging is to begin, they receive a message from General Washington, who pardoned the 12 enlisted men. But the 2 sergeants who were leaders, they were not pardoned. So the 12 who were pardoned were commanded to act as the firing squad to put to death their 2 sergeants, and that did put the end to the mutinies. Now let's talk about the forage wars. And we just don't hear about this because there's so many other things you need to learn about the Revolution. Forage wars just kind of get left out of it, but they were really important because it was part of the thing that discouraged the British out of New Jersey. So from January to April 1777, when Washington's troops were in very bad condition, it was the militia who really did a lot of this stuff. And it was their job to harass the British every time they came into New Jersey to try to find food and forage for their animals. And they did a really, really good job of it. And what you're seeing in red, this is where the British were. And the yellow is where Morristown was. Blue is where the Bound Brook was. And there was a small troop down there all through the winter of 77, not just up in Morristown. That's how they knew that was such a good spot. So it got to the point that the British had to send so many troops every time they were trying to find food in New Jersey, that they just about found enough food to feed the troops while they were trying to find food in New Jersey, that it didn't make worthwhile. So they actually had to start importing it from Great Britain. Now, there was a second foraging war. This was called the Grand Forage. And this was while the Continental troops were in Valley Forge. And there was no food in that area. Philadelphia had pretty much consumed all of it. There wasn't much to the west. So they had to come out of Valley Forge, quite a few, Nathaniel Greene, Anthony Wayne, Henry Lee. They were all sent out with about 1,500 to 2,000 troops to try to find food and forage. Well, the British were doing the same thing from Philadelphia. So you see the Valley Forge is the blue star. Philadelphia is the red. That's where the British are. And then Trenton is up there in green. So the American troops are trying to find food all around that whole area that you see in the slide. So are the British. Now, most of the time, they weren't skirmishing with each other. They were simply competing. And often farmers would hold out hoping for British real money as opposed to continental dollars, which were essentially worthless. Well, if the generals had been told by Washington, if they won't take the IOU, if they won't take the dollars, take the stuff anyway. So they gave them a chance, but then they took it. And the British pretty much at that point were just taking it too. So as farmers in that point in time, you just really couldn't win. So we have the British in Philadelphia. They fought with the Americans in Germantown and in Brandywine to get Philadelphia. They've been there for the winter, but there's been a change of leadership with the Brits. And the new commander-in-chief is Sir Henry Clinton. And he's decided after this Grand Forage War, it's not worth being in Pennsylvania. You can't feed yourself. So he decides they're going back to New York City. So when they leave Philadelphia, they got to take all these loyalists with them. Because when the Americans come back there, you're not going to want to be a loyalist in Philadelphia. So the loyalists also don't want to leave with all their wonderful furniture and food and stuff like that. So there's this gigantic wagon train that has to cross New Jersey to get to Sandy Hook, to get on barges to get to New York City. So these foragers are out there. They send messages back to Washington. Guess what? They're leaving Philadelphia. So Washington tells these guys, harass them, slow them down. So the militia and these troops cut down trees across the road. They destroy bridges, anything to slow the British down until Washington can catch up with all of his troops. So they finally catch up in Monmouth Courthouse. Sound familiar? Well, this was one of the worst battles of the war, not because of its size and who won or who didn't, but because of how awful it was. On June 28th of 1778 was probably one of the hottest, most humid days you could imagine, and they fought a battle for 10 hours. Of the 250 to 300 dead, almost all of them died of heat exposure. So one of the remarkable things about it was this was right after Valley Forge when Baron von Steuben did all of his training with the American troops and actually turned them into a real army. And this demonstrated to the British what he had done, because the British ended up leaving the field of battle. Just like Washington did, you know, you wait till dusk, you leave your fires burning and you sneak off in the night. That's how they left. So the Americans claimed it as a victory. The British claimed it as a victory, but it proved that the Americans had definitely changed. Then in the year of 1780, We find the British on Staten Island, and Baron von Kniphausen is in charge. And he decides that, he's heard a lot of rumors that the American army is in bad condition. And it actually always was, as you will find from Plum Martin. And he decides that he's going to give it a try getting into Morristown, where Washington happens to be. Because if you can kill Washington, it's over. So they make 2 attempts. First time they are turned back by the army and the militia at Connecticut Farms. They are so angry that they are not succeeding that they burn the town. So about a week and a half later, they try again. This time they make it to Springfield before they are stopped. Again, they burn the town. But each time they are turned back, and it is considered that these are the last major incidences in New Jersey. There's still some stuff going on down there in the South, but these are the last major ones. But there's something else going on in New Jersey the entire time, and this is privateering. Now, privateering is different than being a pirate. A privateer receives a letter of marque and reprisal, which comes from the government, whether it's Continental Congress or the state or the King of England. You are allowed to go privateering with bless you from the government. And when you capture something, you bring it back, it gets auctioned off, and some of it goes to the captain and crew, and the rest of it goes to the government, in this case, to support the war. Well, the Continental Navy, of which there was very little, took approximately 200 British ships during the war along the whole coast of the U.S. and in British waters. John Paul Jones, over in Britain. Privateers took approximately 2,300, whole lot more than the Continental Navy did. And an estimated 600 British ships were taken off the New Jersey coast alone by privateers, with the estimated $300 million damage to British commerce. So this is often overlooked in your history books. This was a major player in the Americans winning the Revolutionary War, because they were really doing a job on British shipping. Now, the Loyalists had privateers too, as well as the British Navy, so it went both ways. Now, these were the privateer ports along New Jersey: Raritan Bay, Shrewsbury Inlet, Cranberry Inlet, Little Egg Harbor, and up the Mullica River, and down in Cape May. You can see it covers the whole coast. So how did this go on? There were different size ships that were used. And an example was Captain Adam Hyler. He and his crew used whaleboats. They could put masts on them so they could sail them, but they could also row them, which made them far, far more maneuverable than the ships that they were attacking. They would come in at night, attack them at night, and then be off before anything else could happen. Others used larger ships, such as the schooner Fair American that was captained by Stephen Decatur. And he worked mostly out of Egg Harbor. And he usually hunted with 2 or 3 ships together, so the 3 of them could take on a big British ship. They were very successful. So how did the British deal with this? Well, here's kind of a summary of some of the privateer activity. It started in June of 1776 and ended in 1779, was the last of the, in 83. And in 1776 was the Battle of Turtle Gut Inlet down in Cape May. That did not stop the privateers. There was also the Battle of Chestnut Neck and up into the Mullica River, where the British were able to destroy a privateering base, and then the survivors were massacred afterwards. However, a year and a half later, Chestnut Neck was right back in working order. So the British realized that all they could do was keep attacking them, but in all likelihood, they would never beat them. So now we're getting close to the end of the war at last. And in 1775, the British started supporting, get rid of that, started supporting the Americans by selling them armaments and loaning them the different armaments and stuff, and by sending Lafayette. And it wasn't until July of 1780 that they actually sent troops. And they sent them to Newport, Rhode Island, and Washington went up there and he discussed for a long time with General Rochambeau how they were going to use these troops. Washington really wanted New York back. He really hated having lost New York and he wanted it back. But Rochambeau said, no, we've got a Navy who can come up from the Caribbean and attack the South for you if we can all get down there, but they can't come this far north. They don't have enough time before they're due back in the Caribbean. So we get the march of Washington and Rochambeau from Newport, Rhode Island, all the way down to Yorktown. And in the process, they go through New Jersey, including Chatham. Now, Washington got Rochambeau to send some of his artificers, builders, to Chatham ahead of time to build these bread ovens, these great big bread ovens. So it would look to the spies that were in this area and reporting to New York that it looked like there was going to be a big concentration of army here, which would suggest they were going to attack New York. But they weren't. They were going to go south to Yorktown. And they passed through New Jersey in 3, sometimes 4 columns, so spies never knew how many troops there actually were. And sure enough, they made it down to Yorktown, set a siege on Yorktown, and finally, Cornwallis, almost lost his name. Finally, Cornwallis surrendered. And that was the last of the big hostilities, but it was not the end of hostilities. There was still fighting. There were still people being killed, but it was essentially done. Hopping around there. Okay, so during all of this time, what was the effect on the population? If you lived here and there was only war down here and an encampment over here, you were still affected the entire time in one way or another. Most often because the men were not there. They were in the militia, they were in the Continental Army, they were out doing other work. So it was not unusual at all for women and children to be running everything for long periods of time. It also had the effect that some women did not feel comfortable remaining behind, and they followed the army. We usually hear of camp followers as being prostitutes. The majority of them were not. They were wives, they were sisters, they were daughters. We also have to think about how the Loyalist families were affected. Remember, these people thought they were just as right as the Patriots thought they were right. So often what had to happen was the men left, so they didn't have to be in the militia. They would go off to New York, and they would leave the women to protect the property. Yeah? Okay. And then after the war, if you had enough money, you left. You either went to Nova Scotia or you went to Great Britain or you learned how to live with your neighbors all over again. It was really hard for the Loyalists. And New Jersey had passed a law that they took any land that belonged to Loyalists. So you might have had all of your land taken away from you, even though you had left your wife and children to protect it. Now, there was just as much Loyalist abuse as there was Patriot abuse, depending on who was in charge of the area at a given time. Early in the war, New Brunswick area was full of British troops, so the Loyalists felt really, really strong and could make up any problems they had had with their neighbors in the past. Then the British Army left, and everything turned around the other way. So depending on where you were, especially on the northeastern side of New Jersey, it changed all the time. It was not easy. Loyalty, oaths of loyalty. Both sides would insist on these at any given time. Who was in charge? You better say you're loyal to the king or I'll hang you. You better say you're loyal to the Americans or we're going to hang you. Some of the time, because there was a difficulty getting enough troops at any given time in New Jersey, they forced any loyalist who they would force them to sign the loyalty oath, and then they enlisted them in the Continental Army. Well, what do you think the results of that was? They deserted the minute they got a chance. So it didn't do any good at all. If you were a neutral, you were forced to make a choice one way or the other. So we finally get to the war's end, sort of at the surrender of Yorktown in 81, but it wasn't until the Treaty of Paris was signed in 83, and then it had to get across the ocean, and finally Congress declared the end of the war in 84. But it's not over for everybody. What happens if you're a loyalist? You still have to figure out what you're going to do. So this is America's first Civil War. It was neighbor against neighbor, sometimes family against family. They took turns abusing civilians. They retaliated against each other. It was not a good time to be in this country. It was just really hard, keeping in mind that over 600 violent interactions occurred in New Jersey. So the war gave people permission to behave badly, and they did. So even people who didn't behave badly were often affected. And because New Jersey was the crossroads of the Revolution, all New Jerseyans were affected, even if no battles or encampments occurred locally. These are my references. I've put in red the ones that I really found the best. Joseph Plum Martin, The People's History of the American Revolution. Ray Raphael really talks about the average person. The Glorious Cause by Robert Middlecoff. This is the most readable and complete history of the revolution you're going to find. And Choosing Sides, Loyalists in the Revolution of Revolutionary America, written by Ruma Chopra. It's really interesting to look at it from the other side. And I challenge you to think, based on what kind of person you are, what would you have been? Would you have been a patriot, a loyalist, or neutral? I hate to say it, I probably would have been a loyalist. I'm this law-abiding citizen. So really give it some thought. What would you have been? All right. Thank you very much. Any questions? Any questions?
So
Yes.
the difference between the militia and you mentioned brigades.
The brigades, that was part of the Continental Army. Yes. If you were in the militia, you were more local, but the brigades were actually the ones that were in the Continental Army. Yeah.
I have a question. Were you saying that the French came in at the end?
Well, the French were kind of helping out all along. They were sending armaments and stuff like that. But French soldiers actually finally came over, and they're the ones that really helped win at Yorktown. Yeah. Yeah, we might not have made it without them.
Is that what gave us Statue of Liberty? Is that all part of that?
You know, I don't remember exactly. Oh, now you're really. It was the anniversary of what?
That's what he's 100 years late.
Ah, thank you. Okay. Yeah. Oh, I don't remember that. Yes.
That. This, did they have so much going between the Loyalists and the,
Yes, the question was for colonies that were not the crossroads of the revolution, did they have as much loyalist and rebel? Yes, they did. It was everywhere. And actually, after the British realized that they weren't going to win in New Jersey, they decided to go south because they thought there was a lot more loyalist sympathy down there. And if they went down there, the loyalists would rise up and they would be able to defeat the Americans that way. They didn't. Some of them did, but not enough. So yes, it was everywhere. It was everywhere. Yes.
Even though he was talking to George Washington about, not going to New York, prior to he had DeGrasse come up with the ships unbeknownst to George.
I'm not sure. I'm really not sure about that part. I do know that there was a lot of discussion between Rochambeau and Washington, and Rochambeau kind of put his foot down and said, this is what I can do for you. But they were up there. The ships were up there at one point. They were damaged by a hurricane and had to leave. So they were up there, but I think Washington knew they were there. Yes, it's sort of coming. Yes. Why is Valley Forge more known than Jockey Hollow? The gentleman who is in charge of Jockey Hollow has a lot of complaints about this, and he says it's because they do better advertising. They just started advertising sooner. Yep.
Gotta market.
You gotta market. Yep. Anyone online? Oh, good.
You mentioned
Okay. Well, please come and visit the museum and the library when we have the Rev NJ panels there. These panels talk about some of the things that I've mentioned, what it was like to be a woman, a child, an enslaved person, a free Black, a Native American, a privateer. What was it like to live during the Revolution? It'll give you a whole different view of what it was like because all of you would have been affected. So please come and see us. Yes.
Anyone here that's not gone to the Battle of Monmouth reenactment, it is really cool. Yes, they do a really good job down there. Yes, go to the Battle of Monmouth when you get a chance. And they do it every year. They're really devoted to it. They also do a 5 Generals tour, which is a bus tour that takes you to where 5 different generals stayed during the war. It's really good. Yeah, they do a great job. Very good. Good.
when you
Thank
mentioned
you very much. Oh, wait a minute.
when you mentioned the bridge into Chatham, would that be where Watchung is over the Passaic River?
I'm so sorry, I don't remember.
Oh, Ford Mansion.
Yes.
Yes. No? Huh? Well, if you look on RevNJ, just that, revnj.org, they have all of these different events that are going on, all these different places to visit. We're the cockpit of the revolution. Take advantage of it. There's so much stuff out there. And Saturday, I am doing the talk again in Summit that I did here last year about Washington slept here a lot. I'd have to look at my calendar to tell you what time,
So look on the Summit Library and it's free. Yeah. Okay, thank you.